guys, welcome to my video breakdown on how I develop the BobLegs, something that you can develop at home. I hope you enjoy this. A lot of this is time-lapse for speed, but essentially I wanted to create something that had a kicking leg attachment for the bob, and then simultaneously while I was at it, I threw in this Wing Chun kicking leg so that I could practice my front leg kicks, and also practice, my calf kicks and my front leg side kicks and things like that, so that I could practice on here. Like I said, I wanted to have this as a tool for practicing development for, defending my roundhouse kicks, for getting on top of it for my cut kicks, this type of stuff. I can even lower it and set it for defending things like my leg kicks when it feels like cooperating, so that I can practice things like sliding my foot out, coming back in, counter punch here. As you can see how it all blends together, and it makes for a really nice, useful tool. And my whole goal on this was to kind of create something that could be reset so I can practice different types of drills as well. Anyway, enjoy the video and make sure you smash that subscribe.
Okay guys, so to start with, I took a piece of 2x4 and attached it to a 2x6 just so that I can create the base so that I can drill the hole in. And I did this at about a 110-degree angle. It's not really a pure 90-degree angle because I wanted to come slightly upward as I come out with the 3/4 inch pipe. And as you can see here, the 3/4 inch pipe fits in just perfectly. It's at a nice upward angle to give it a little bit of stability, because my goal in this is, I have three goals. One is I don't want to damage the bob in any way. Two, I want to make sure it has a lot of stability and rigidity so that way it's a nice solid base. And number three, I wanted to make sure it has enough flexibility and motion so it doesn't ruin the base or break in half. This here is a female to female adjuster that I just cut it in half so I can create a knuckle behind it so that it doesn't pop out. I want to make sure that this pipe really gets fixed in there nice and well. So as you can see, it screws into it and it'll keep that in place. Now from right here, I'm going to use my 1/2-inch chisel, using my mallet, never a hammer because I don't want to damage my chisels. And I'm going to chisel out a larger hole in the back so that this way it'll fit in there real nicely. And you can see here, the hole is a little bit larger in the back, which is what I want. And I slide it right in, and it's nice and flush, which is perfect. Nice and flush with the board. All right. Right here, I'm going to glue it down using some wood glue. And since I wasn't sure if the wood glue would be enough to adhere to it, I also added some wood chips in there and some sawdust to kind of make it like putty like I do for, fixing in some of the holes that I do in some of my woodworking. But mostly it's just to keep it in place. From here, I use some MDF board. I end up getting rid of this later on and replacing it with a piece of... I found a metal plate that I was able to use that worked a lot better. Here I just cut it down to size. I had measured it and realized it was a little bit too long, so I just cut it down. Now I'm going to take a couple pieces, and I measured these out on the bob to make sure that it would kind of help hold it in place, because obviously it's a rounded surface. So I want to have more points of contact on the bob than just one flat point in the back. So I'm going to screw this in. I use 5 screws down the side, some nice long wood screws. And as you can see here, nice and easy. Drill it in, screw these in, and I've got a nice sideboards that are going to go along the side of it. And once again, this is going to help with some of the stability as well. So you can see now we have our base piece. And it is a nice sturdy base, and it's going to hold together well. Now here I took off the MDF board, decided to get rid of that, and found that that plate works a lot better. And I happen to have one of those laying around, but if you do decide to buy one, they're like $1. They're pretty cheap. Now I'm going to take a second hole. At this point, I was not sure exactly. I kind of had a loose vision of what I wanted this to be, but nothing exact. So, I drilled into it, and I did another hole that was a 3/4 inch hole, but this one was 90 degrees because I decided I was going to add a Wing Chun kicking leg. And so now I have 2 holes. I have one for the kicking leg and one for the Wing Chun front leg. From right here, I'm going to plane down some of the sharper edges because at this point I hadn't decided if I was going to cover this whole thing in canvas or leave it wood. But either way, I didn't want to have all the sharp, jagged edges and corners, so I decided to, plane these off. And then from here, I'm going to go through and I'm going to sand it down as well. Mostly that was just to get rid of the splinters. I'm not going to get too crazy on this, and although I did a lot of sanding behind the scenes that you're not going to see here, my goal was just to make sure that it wasn't too splintery because, like I said, I hadn't decided on what I was going to do with it yet. But, this is all scrap wood. It's already kind of banged up. And while it's sturdy pieces, I didn't necessarily want to spend a ton of time sanding it like it was one of my regular woodworking projects where, I want to sand it down so it's almost like smooth as glass. I'm not trying to do that. I just don't want to get splinters, and I don't want to get too banged up, basically. So I just got the worst of it out. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start cutting in some grooves. This is my coping saw. If you guys don't have one of these, man, they're worth it. They're like 20 bucks. I've had this thing forever, and it is amazing. I love that saw. It's my favorite saw. And I use that to just kind of put in some grooves, and then I'm going to take my half-inch chisel. Once again, using a mallet, never a hammer, because I don't want to damage my chisels, and always pointing it away from me so that I don't get hurt. And I'm just going to get some of the worst of it out. Now, the great thing about this is because it's pine, everything wasn't like butter, right? Like if I were going to do this out of oak, it would take significantly longer and be a lot more force involved because it's a much harder wood. But pine is such an easy wood to work with in terms of like removing excess material. It's super easy to just chisel this stuff out. And, I'm far from an expert. Like when you see these pros do it, like everything looks like perfect when they're done. Like they almost don't even need to sand it, but they do anyway because they're perfectionists. Mine does not look like that. So, mine's, pretty divoted and stuff like that. But I was able to get the grooves out, which worked out really well. And then I went through and sanded it so that now I'm going to have some nice grooves in there for the straps. And that's going to help keep this thing in place. And so it doesn't shift around a whole bunch. But this is what the first one looks like. And as you can see, I'm going to go through and do it around all the other sides. This here, I don't remember what. This is the second pipe. That's what it is. It's the second pipe that's going to be using for the Wing Chun front leg. And right here, I'm going to go through and I'm going to cut out all the other divots and stuff like that. While I'm doing that, I'm just going to mention that, the whole project cost me probably about $100, but I also had to buy some stuff that, like a soldering kit and stuff like that I didn't have. But you could probably make this whole thing for less than 75 bucks. And if I were going to make it again, I could probably easily do it for that, maybe even less. But the biggest expense is going to be the U-joint, which is like 35 bucks, but it's worth it. Like, that's the one part that you absolutely have to have. The rest of it, the money is going to kind of depend on what tools you already have. For me, I've got a pretty decent tool shop. Nothing crazy, but I've got a decent tool set so that I'm able to do quite a bit. I've got a miter saw and a table saw and coping saws and chisels and all that stuff. If you don't have a lot of these tools or have access to these tools, it might cost you more or might be more difficult. You might have to find other workarounds. But honestly, tools are a worthwhile investment anyway. I'm a big believer in you don't buy it all at once. You buy a little bit at a time and then you continue to grow it. And that over time you end up with a pretty respectable set of tools. And it's always a worthwhile investment. It's never a bad thing to have more tools. I love having, a wide variety. And every time I get a project, I kind of look forward to when I do have to buy a new tool for it because it's something that I'll have for next time, which is fun. So here, I'm going to go ahead and plane the insides of it just so that way it'll just have more surface on the bob because I want to try to have as much of that as possible so it doesn't shift around too much. This here is the U-joint. I'm going to put the Amazon ASIN below. But this thing's amazing. Like, this is like, it took me a long time to find the perfect tool for what I needed, and this is it. The one thing I will say is I wasn't very bright, and I had forgotten a 3/4 inch pipe and a 3/4 inch U-joint are not going to attach because they are the same size. So I went out and bought a 5/8 inch, basically piece of like a thick piece of metal, like screwed pipe. And I just cut it down to size, and I said, okay, I'm going to solder it into place. Now, I have never done soldering before. This is the first time I've ever done it, so it was kind of exciting to kind of see what I could do with it. And for a first attempt, I did okay. Like, I definitely need more practice at it, but it was kind of a fun little project. The only thing that was fun is this is the first project I ever had to do a mortise and tenon joint. I'd never needed to. I've done dovetail joints a bunch of times, but I've never had to do a mortise and tenon joint, so it was kind of fun being able to like do some new stuff, and that's the cool thing about new projects like this. This is me doing the soldering. I know you're supposed to try to solder it on the back side of the pipe and not on the front side because otherwise it'll just melt right down. And it was challenging. So I had to do it from a distance, but the challenge was doing it on the wood and stuff like that. And I'm inexperienced, so I'll have to practice that going forward. You will notice I did add some electrical tape around it as well just to kind of really hold it in place. And what you won't see is underneath it, I also have some of the soldering that's wrapped around the base of it so that it kind of keeps it nice and rigid in there. So that piece is pretty fixed on. This is, of course, my favorite part of any project is adding finish. I like to use beeswax because, one, is it doesn't show mistakes with glue, and two, I'm used to using it for cutting boards and stuff like that where you want something that's non-toxic, but I also really like that wood finish. This here, I'm starting on the leg. I'm going to cut out a little bit at the bottom to angle it just slightly so that it can angle up to it. So it's not going to be 90 degrees with the floor. I want to have it slightly sticking outward. And I'm going to be cutting this down to size. And this is where I'm going to start doing the mortise and tenon joint. So you can't see it here, but I do have this measured out with the other board. And for a first attempt at a mortise and tenon, this went really well. I was really happy with the work I did. I understood the basic principle of it. I felt like I kind of rushed it a little bit. I would have liked to have spent a little bit more time measuring it than I did here. I did a rough measurement using a piece of wood that was the right size that I wanted for it, and I used that to pencil around it. But I feel like in the future, I would probably cut it so it's a little bit thicker and spend more time sanding it down to the size I wanted, as opposed to here where it was a little bit like looser at the bottom than I would have liked. From here, to remove the excess on the inside of the joint, I just use my chisel. And as you can see here, this is my 1/8 inch chisel. And I'm just going to cut out all the excess here. This is pretty simple. This was actually not too bad at all to just go ahead and remove that. And as you can see, it just pops right out. It's very rewarding. I really like doing this joint. This is fun. I'm going to try to find some more projects that require this going forward. I love joinery. Woodworking joinery is one of my favorite things ever. Unfortunately, because of the sake of time, I didn't want to do a lot of like things that I normally do with joinery, where I use like wooden dowel rods instead of screws, and I do more wood glue and stuff like that. So I don't like using metal parts on my woodworking, but for the sake of this project and also just to create a little bit of durability, I did use metal screws. So I'm not mad. And this, I'm just using my miter saw to cut this down to shape for the adjustable piece. And now I'm going to cut out the outsides of this so that this one is going to fit nice and smooth. You can see how I have a little bit of excess. I ended up having to sand that down, but overall I was pretty pleased with it. I did throw in a little bit of wood glue inside to really, get it into place. And I had a little bit of a gap at the bottom, but this is where you can use those shavings and stick it right in there and fill that gap up. And because this is not some decorative box or something like that, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, it's okay if it's a little bit, if it shows a little bit of glue. But like I said, this is why I use the beeswax anyway, because, glue doesn't show up on beeswax. But quick tip, if you ever are using stain and you do have to glue, don't sand it or wipe it away if you happen to smudge. Let it smudge, and then when you're done, just take a chisel and chisel out the excess, and you're good to go. It's a little trick I picked up. It's much better, and that way you won't have all that glue stains when you go to do the stain on top of it. So just a little quick tip for you people who are starting to get into this type of stuff, or if you do want to use stain as opposed to using beeswax. I think I'm probably going to go back and do mineral oil on top of it as well. So I did the beeswax, but I think I'm going to probably do one more coat with the mineral oil, really soak it in, give it a nice finish. Yeah. And as you can see, I'm just kind of filling in the gap with some wood glue, and you can see me reaching down to the bottom, getting some sawdust, and I'm going to put the sawdust right in that gap. And here I screw it down. Like I said, I didn't want to use my wooden dowels just because of the sake of time, and just because this thing's going to take some abuse, so a few metal parts would be good for it. Here I'm cutting the base piece a little bit shorter so that I can kind of see, so that it'll run flush up to the base piece. And as you can see, this is what it looks like. Now I'm going to do a 3/4 inch hole at the bottom of this. Once again, this is the advantage of having some vises there. Normally, also not a bad idea to use some sort of a guide. Once again, I'm just cutting off some of the angles. I hadn't decided at this point what I was going to do, if I was going to just leave it wood or throw some padding over it. I did go through and add on some canvas padding later on, but even still, I want to take out some of these jagged edges, so you won't see it a whole lot here. I did a very quick version, but I actually did quite a bit more planing and sanding behind the scenes. But essentially, I wanted to smooth this out, round it out a little bit, so that way, if I do kick the wood, it's not going to be quite as sharp on my feet. Okay, go through one of my favorite parts. Once again, going to add the finish where it brings everything to life. Man, I could just watch people finishing projects all day long. It's so fun. It's such a rewarding thing. It's like watching those zip popping videos. Just rewarding to watch things take on their natural form. Here, I'm going to cut a piece of pipe for the wooden base piece, or for the Wing Chun leg. Make sure it fits. And, here I'm actually sanding out the inside. That was just me taking a piece of the metal rod with some sandpaper. And then I'm cutting a couple pieces of wood because I want to add a little bit of stability on the sides. Oh, this is actually for the base leg. That's what that is. And I'm just drilling that into the bottom so that way it holds. And I used a little bit of felt at the bottom. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can. Um, I just felt it would kind of help, especially because I have carpet. But honestly, if you have hardwoods, it's even better because you don't want to ding up your floors. And here I'm going to cut off a couple side pieces because I want to give a little bit of stability to the leg, because I don't want it shifting too much side to side, because that's a pretty, there's not a lot of room for the wood on each side of that hole. So that hole doesn't have a lot of depth behind it. So I want to really make sure it doesn't shimmy around too much side to side. As you can see, it fits right in. Now I'm going through and I'm adding in my straps, and I'm going to screw them down into this because I want them to be permanently affixed to really keep this thing in place. Now I'm taking some pipe insulation and I'm wrapping the base of the leg. And I'm going to cut it so that it goes on the inside, and then I'll throw a little electrical tape around it just to kind of keep it in place. And I'm going to do the other side, fill in the inside. Once again, throw a little electrical tape, and it looks like so. Now, from right here, I took some canvas, and you can buy this in any hardware store or in the paint section. I think this piece cost me like $7 or $8. Cut it down to size, and then I just took a staple gun and I went all the way down the side. I put in like 100 staples down the side like it was stitches, and that's what kept it in place, and it worked fantastically. It worked really, really well. And you'll see here, I do throw a little bit of electrical tape at the bottom just to kind of keep it in place, but cutting this out, and I'm going to wrap it just like so. So this will make a nice kicking leg. And as you can see here, this is after it's staple gunned at the bottom. I should have shown the bottom, but I didn't. And it holds perfectly well. And I tested it out a little bit. It works fantastic. I'm really, really happy with how the leg came out. Here I'm adding a little top piece with an S-clip, and I'm going to add a spring. And my thought is that this U-joint, I'm not sure if it's going to be strong enough to keep the pipe up on its own. So I'm going to add a spring so that if I want to keep it at a higher level, and I can make these adjustable by having a couple holes in the pipe, that this way it'll hold it. This one here in the leg, I just wanted to show that you can see I put another piece of pipe in the center, and I drilled a hole in the center so that that way it could insert it, and it would be a perfect fit with a little bit of electrical tape around it to make it snug. Here, instead of using the pipe that I ordered that I was going to use, I decided that I had these old crutches lying around, and I'm glad I used this instead because this worked perfect. A pipe would have been way too heavy. Even this, I had to make some adjustments for the springs later on. I still got to make some fine tuning, but this worked out perfect. And then I kept the end of the crutch to use to kind of put a little safety cap at the end. And then to make it fit, I just took that 5/8 inch screw piece that I had, and I just inserted it in there so that that way it'll make a nice snug adjustment to the U-joint. I put some pipe insulation around this again, just like I did with the kicking leg for the Wing Chun leg. And I'm going to wrap it around with some electrical tape to get it to hold. And as you can see here, it's a nice little wrap on it so that it covers it up nicely. And that'll give me some protection when I'm using this. Now I'm just cutting out some canvas for it. I'm just going to wrap it just like I did before and do the exact same thing. You don't see it here, but I did go ahead and staple gun it in down the side. Here I'm just inserting some springs and some eye holes into it. I use the S-clips to kind of attach it, but this is a thing that it's going to take a little bit of fine-tuning. I anticipate you're going to have to do a little bit on your own. And you can see here, right now I have 2 on the top and 2 on the sides, but I think I'm going to buy 4 more and give it a little bit more structure, because what I wanted to do is kind of hold in the same position, but then still have some mobility and have a lot more spring back. And of course, I'm just showing here how this disassembles off of it. So this is pretty much it. I really enjoyed how this came together. I hope you enjoyed it too.